So, good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome for all of you. When we started to organize this session, we were a bit afraid that on Friday evening, before the election, so close to the election, there will be a very low level of interest towards this event. And looking around the room, it seems that these fears were premature and highly unjustified. I would like to thank for CU Democracy Institute that they co-organized this event with us, Political Capital Institute. And maybe the reason for this high attendance is that we have brilliant guests for this evening. And let me welcome our keynote speaker, Timothy Garton Ash. He needs no introduction, still I will briefly introduce him. He's a British historian, author and commentator, professor of European Studies at University of Oxford, who has written dozens of books. Most of his work has been concerned with contemporary history of Europe, with a special focus on Central Eastern Europe. He has written about the former communist regimes of that region. And he has also examined the role of Europe in the world and the challenge of combining political freedom and diversity, especially in relation to freedom of speech. And Tim was also here 4 years ago at the previous elections, and he's here now to observe this election. We will see how different this experience is going to be for him. But we also have two other brilliant speakers, Cristina Arato from JTK, sorry, yeah, and also Zsolt Enyedi from CU. And we had quite a lot of discussions already, and I think everyone in the room have attended to multiple discussions that have dealt dominantly with two issues. First, that how the elections will have an impact on the life and politics in Hungary. Second, how other countries will have an impact on the results of Hungarian elections. Today we would like to discuss a topic that maybe is a bit less covered so far, how the election results in Hungary will have an impact on the external world, including the broader region, including European Union, including Europe beyond the European Union, and also in the global dimension, what is the real stake of the Hungarian elections. And I think in Hungary we tend to think that Hungary is the center of the universe in many sense, and right now the huge media attention that is dedicated, political attention that is dedicated to the Hungarian elections, I think just seem to confirm this this impression. So Timothy, Cristina and Zsolt will help us to fact check this statement that Hungary have become so important that the election results in Hungary will have a very strong and extensive influence in the world. So this is the topic of our discussion today. And first, Timothy will do a keynote speech for about 30 minutes, and then we are going for a roundtable. Then you will have the chance to raise questions, and then you can find some wine and finger food outside the room. So this is the program for today. Thanks a lot again for all of you for coming and joining. And Timothy, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's wonderful to be back in Budapest, see you, political capital, terrific panel, see so many friends. And I hope the party on Sunday night is a bit more cheerful than the one on that Sunday night in 2022, because I have to tell you, it was the saddest party I have ever attended in my life. And that's saying a lot, if you know English parties. I thought I would start with a historical curiosity, since we hope this is going to be a historic occasion. I have with me my notebook from June 1988, when I was introduced for the first time to some really promising young students who I were told were terrific idealistic liberals, and I wrote down their names for the first time. Here they are, Josef Sayer, Gabor Fodor, and a guy called Viktor Orban. And what's so interesting, this was less than 3 months after the founding of Fidesz. My notes, and they emphasized this to me, the most important thing is our values, they said. And so I said, what are the values? And they said, well, for example, the rule of law, human rights, freedom of association, freedom of the press. So let's hope those things arrive in Hungary 38 years later. Our subject today, if I put it as a kind of exam question, as tasked by Peter, I guess it would be, quote, in terms of its international consequences, this is the most important Hungarian election ever. Discuss. So that's what I want to do. And I want to do it by looking at 5 what you might like to think of as concentric circles, or possibly polycentric circles. Central Europe, EU, wider Europe, transatlantic, what we used to call the West, and global geopolitics. And obviously we don't know the result. In my notes I say if F, or if T, if Fidesz, if TISZA, but obviously there are at least 2 variants of each. Clear Fidesz victory, narrow, highly dubious Fidesz victory, where the fact that this is clearly not going to be a fair election plays an enormous role, and then you get contested election scenario. The most likely result, which at the moment seems to be simple majority for TISZA, or constitutional majority. So in my notes, T+. And if we're thinking about international consequences, we obviously have to think about those 4, so 2 + 2. So here we go. I'm going to lay out a few thoughts quite simply. Much of it is informed guesswork, and then I'm looking forward to the discussion. Central Europe. If it's a Fidesz victory again, as you all know, Viktor Orban loves to talk in the name of Central Europe, to identify Central Europe with his version of politics, of Western civilization. If the Polish right wins the Polish parliamentary election next October, then there is again a chance, it seems to me, for Orban to tell that narrative about Central Europe, right? But not until that point, because while he has Donald Tusk in charge as Prime Minister of the largest country in Central Europe, it doesn't work. And let's see what happens in Slovakia. If TISZA, clearly part of the program of the TISZA leadership is a reset of all the relationships in Central Europe. And so one can, I think, expect some sort of a cautious, limited relaunch of some kind of a Visegrad kind of world, but of course deeply qualified by the fact that you've got Robert Fico in Slovakia and Babiš, who is just Babiš, something sui generis, but certainly not a classic liberal, pro-European. The more interesting question, it seems to me, is not about Central Europe as a network, as a neighborhood, but about Central Europe as, if I may put it this way, a political condition, right? So, if we have, and this is a word that I have been relearning, rendszerváltás. I remember that word in 1989. system change or regime change, which of course requires a constitutional majority, because otherwise you're bloody well not going to get it, then there is a real chance that Central Europe becomes not just a regional but a global trendsetter in showing how you can recover from quite far-reached state capture and effectively move back from electoral authoritarian to some credible version of liberal democracy, right? That would be a remarkable achievement. It is, of course, precisely what we hoped for in Poland after the October 2023 election, and precisely what is not happening in Poland. In Poland, you have Comrade Trotsky's dual power, and you have the captured state now in the form of President Nawrocki effectively blocking what the Tusk government is trying to do. So the danger is that if we get T but not T plus, in other words, only a simple majority, this is exactly what we will see in Hungary for some time to come. I look forward to hearing what Zsolt and Christina have to say about that. And so that the Central European condition will become one of incomplete democracy and incomplete authoritarianism. You will get a kind of semi-permanent hybrid state. And that seems to me the danger. This brings me on to EU. Of course, Sunday will be the 23rd anniversary of Hungarians voting to join the EU. So it's an interesting day from the point of view of the relationship with the EU. If I had been Mephistopheles in 2010 and I wanted to design an agent to show up all the structural weaknesses of the EU, I would have designed Fidesz, right? Fidesz has been absolutely brilliant, one has to acknowledge, at exposing all the intrinsic structural weaknesses of an enlarged EU. The grandiose abuse of EU funds, which became, and I think Christian Orban said this very well, there would be no Orban system without EU funds. EU funds used, in fact, to violate precisely the values expressed in Article 2 of the Treaty on European Union, and done with immense success. The extraordinary skill with which the EPP was exploited, so that, as Daniel Kellerman, I think, has very well argued, that thing that was designed to enhance democracy at the EU level, namely European political parties, facilitated the demolition of democracy at the member state level. The sweet conditions for the German car industry and other industries, the way in which EU rules were used to violate fundamental norms, and of course, the fact that the European Council functions essentially as a gentleman's club, right? And this shouldn't be underestimated. And dear Vector was brilliant at playing the gentleman's club. I know that from many, many conversations. Oh, you know, Victor, in the end, he'll always make a compromise. Jean-Claude Juncker, 2015, hello, dictator. Great joke. All these structural weaknesses of the EU have been brilliantly exposed by Fidesz. If Fidesz remains in power, my working assumption is that the gloves will be off, that Orban, who doesn't give a shit anymore about this, will be even more confrontational. He will be the blackmailer in chief, but the blackmailer in chief in spades. And he will, of course, strengthen people like Fico and, in the Polish context, Nawrocki, in their desire and readiness to do the same. So I think the impact of Fidesz remaining in power in such a critical moment for the EU, when the EU is under threat simultaneously from Moscow, Washington, and Beijing, will be extremely damaging. If we have TISZA, and I just had the pleasure of having an hour's conversation with Anita Orban, there's no question there will be a very significant reset. I'm sure Christina will say more about this, and there's huge readiness on the part of the EU to welcome Hungary back, to release the EU funds and so on. The question then becomes whether the EU will structurally have learnt anything from these 16 years. I'm very interested to hear Christina on this. I myself am skeptical about that. I think Brussels will have learned something on EU funds. So I think there will be more care and more willingness to withhold funds on grounds of corruption and rule of law. And I think the EU will be more willing to do coalitions of the willing, simply to go ahead without one or two member states. What I think is much less likely is, so to speak, the systemic constitutional answers, which would be giving teeth to Article 7 or actually having more qualified majority voting on issues like sanctions on Russia, for discussion. So I think the TISZA outcome is very good news for the EU, but I'm skeptical about the notion that never again. And I think if the next French president is called Jordan Bardella, he'll have plenty of opportunities to play from the Orban playbook. So that's EU. Third concentric circle, or maybe it's polycentric circle, Ukraine. Next to Hungary itself, I think this result, if it is Fidesz, is arguably most dangerous for Ukraine. Because Ukraine is in an absolutely critical situation, having been effectively abandoned by the United States, and now having the very negative effects of the Third Gulf War impacting it. It really needs those 90 billion. It needs everything that the EU can do, both economically and militarily, to keep it in the fight. And if you still have a Viktor Orban who has just fought an election campaign, now not just saying, I'm going to keep you out of the war, but saying Ukraine is the enemy, and privately on the telephone, Mr. Seato to Mr. Lavrov and Orban to Putin, how can I be of service? We can imagine how that's going to look. So that I think the stakes, if we're talking about international stakes, are very high, specifically for Ukraine. If TISZA, I think it's very good news for Ukraine, because clearly a TISZA government will lift the block on the 90 billion and go along with most of the measures. All that is required is that it does that in a permissive way, right? So nobody is asking or expecting that Hungary will be in the front line of support for Ukraine, but it's not needed. And as for EU membership, this is not the immediate issue. The immediate issue is keeping Ukraine in the fight for the next year or two. As we go down the road towards potential EU membership, there are going to be huge issues along the way, but Hungary is not going to be the only country having problems with those. There are lots of member states. Poland, agriculture. France, agriculture. I mean, yes, it's going to be an extraordinarily difficult process, but even a, so to speak, Ukraino-skeptical Hungary will be somewhere in the middle of the convoy. Okay, so I think good news. Quickly, TISZA victory, good news for the Balkans, because that's of course the other point area where Hungary, with its role in media and business and the special relationship with Vucic, plays a significant role. What I don't think, and I want to hear Zsolt on this because he may disagree, what I don't think is that on this election hangs in large measure the future of anti-liberal, nationalist, populist parties across Europe and the wider West. Nigel Farage's election prospects in Britain, pretty much irrelevant. AfD in Germany, marginal. Jordan Bardella in France doesn't play a big role, I would say. Probably his soft focus photo with the Princess Bourbon of the Two Sicilies is more important than the Hungarian election result for the election prospects of Jordan Bardella. So I think this is one of the points which is being overstated. The Guardian this morning said, bellwether for the global far right. I have my doubts. Now, I come to my fourth concentric circle, transatlantic, and the question of the impact on Trump and Trumpianism. So I don't need to tell this audience that the influence of the Orban example on the American right has been extraordinary. My good friend Ivan Krastev says that Viktor Orban is a Fidel Castro of the Trumpian right. It's been amazing, particularly on the sort of culture war wing, the J.D. Vance wing. But is this a big blow ultimately for Trump in the context of US politics? Come off it. No, let's not overstate the case. The results of the Third Gulf War, the behavior of ICE, the cost of living, these are the issues that will determine. This is going to be truly marginal. More marginal, by the way, than it was in 2024, when Orban was one of the few foreign leaders who Trump mentioned. Where I think it will have an impact is in two sort of narrower spaces. Number one, it is going to be a blow to the Vance, the J.D. Vance school of Trumpianism, right? So the culture wars Trumpianism, which is the Vance school. Vance it was who gives that speech at the Munich Security Conference. Vance comes to Budapest. That will, the version of culture wars which counterposes quote unquote Western civilization, understood as white Christian European national traditional family, against the EU. That will take a hit. Maybe not a big hit, but it'll take a hit if it's a TISZA victory, and score if it's Fidesz. More significantly, I think, but this is for discussion, that if TISZA succeeds, despite the ringing endorsements from Washington, this will be the beginning of the end of what one might call the Trump endorsement effect in European politics, right? So 2024, 2025, don't underestimate the Trump endorsement effect. Karol Nawrocki won a very, very narrow victory against Rafał Trzaskowski in the Polish presidential election, and the fact that he had such a ringing endorsement from Trump played a role, I can tell you, because of the significance of the US for Polish security and so on. Until recently, Nigel Farage was, it mattered. But I think because Trump is so visibly screwing up on so many fronts, right, as so many voters can see, and because the endorsements, if the endorsement in this case simply is not effective, right, I think you're going to see the beginning of the end of a Trump endorsement effect. And I think potentially populists in future elections are going to be more cautious about associating themselves with Trump. But again, Zsolt will have things to say on this. I come finally to my fifth and largest concentric circle, which is the global geopolitical. Now here, Orban is really important, because Orban, as you all know, was really one of the first European politicians to smell and get onto the global geopolitical and geoeconomic shift that we are now all seeing. He, faster than anyone, drew that lesson from the 2008 global financial crisis, so that already 2011, opening to the East, initially as an economic policy, and then, of course, famously and publicly, 2014, explicitly explaining that the future of modernity is no longer with the West, and the future might be with illiberal democracies with strong connections with countries, particularly like China and others. And the extraordinary achievement, and this goes to the point about exposing structural weaknesses of the EU, the extraordinary achievement of Viktor Orban is that he has been able to behave as if he were Narendra Modi, doing what Modi calls multi-aligning. So I'm friends with everybody. I get into bed with her on this and him on that and somebody else on something else, but I'm playing all sides, multi-aligning, polyamory. But Orban is doing this in a relatively small member state of the EU and NATO. That's pretty extraordinary. And that he has got away with this so successfully and gone so far with it. And now we see just how far in the audio recordings, Seattle Lavrov, and even what Orban himself says about his meetings with Putin, I'm at your service, and of course in the relationship with China. There's a very interesting paper, if you're interested, by a man called Sam Chetwin-George of the Asia Society, just released, called Hungary under Orban, China's Bridgehead in Europe. 2024, Hungary becomes one of relatively few countries in the world to have a so-called all-weather partnership with China, almost the highest category of partnership. So that we have this extraordinary situation where Viktor Orban is being supported simultaneously by Trump, by Putin, and quietly by Xi Jinping, right? And in being this bridgehead, both Russian and Chinese bridgehead, not just in Europe, but inside the EU, and at the decision-making table, actually on issues like names on the Russian sanctions list, insisting on points which are not at all Hungarian national interest points, but are purely Russian points, or, by the way, also Chinese points. He has been massively facilitating what my Oxford colleague Dimitar Bechev in a new book is calling the scramble for Europe. So in the late 19th century, Europeans had the scramble for Africa. Now we've got the scramble for Europe, China, Russia, Turkey, and others, and the scramble for Europe. So if Fidesz, if F, that gets worse. If T, what happens then? So I would say the key change here is in relation to Russia. And obviously that's partly about the shifting position on Ukraine, which is particularly important, but it's more than that. You no longer have your man or woman at the decision-making table in Brussels, at all levels, by the way, not just at the top level. You no longer have your listening station, bringing you up immediately after council meetings to tell you what has been decided. And in time, although this is going to be very difficult, with luck, you have diminishing energy dependency, although that's going to be a difficult one. So that I think the potential change for Russia is quite significant, precisely because the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is so finely balanced. China, it seems to me, but for discussion, is a different case, because China is playing a long game. It's not about the next 6 months or year. It's not about one particular decision. It's about a long-term strategy. In Europe, you in Hungary are going to have the Chinese economic presence one way or another. We're all looking for Chinese investment. And by the way, particularly given the likely economic crisis that we're now going into, partly as a result of the Third Gulf War, there are going to be more takers all over Europe for Chinese investment. So China is going to have plenty of long-term possibilities for exercising influence. So that I think the bigger change in terms of the global geopolitics, beyond the fact that you don't have, so to speak, Modi in Brussels, a multi-aligning EU leader, is the change for Russia, not for China. I come to an end. So, back to our exam question. Yep, international consequences, most important Hungarian election ever. Well, possibly. I think quite a few of the claims that we're hearing in the media are very overstated. And by the way, I think a lot of the hopes are probably too high. Because for those hopes to be realized, you need that constitutional majority. If you get the constitutional majority, I'll be the happiest man alive, and then you can, I think, have something more significant. But if it's simple majority, then I think there are significant positive implications for Central Europe, for the EU, for reducing the Trumpian endorsement effect, for Ukraine, and for the relationship with Russia. And that, even if it isn't the most historic Hungarian election in world history, would still be a pretty good result. Thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Timothy, for this concise summary of how the Hungarian elections can have an impact on politics. And you did not make my work easier in the sense that in your concentric circles pretty much covered all of the topics that I wanted to raise during the roundtable and questions, but you also made my work a bit easier in the sense that I think in the first round it's just easy to reflect on the words, on your words and your points. So first I would turn to you, Christina, and again for the latecomers, let me again introduce our speakers. So beyond Timothy Garton Ash, we have Christina Arató, political scientist, professor and director of the Institute of Political Science at the Faculty of Law at ELTE. And also we have Zsolt Enyedi, professor and senior researcher at the CEU Democracy Institute and Central European University. So the first question to you, Christina. Timothy mentioned that in the European Union, if Orbán wins again, then he can be even more combatant. maybe, the European Union takes its gloves, but maybe they have not learned enough lessons in the last few years. While if Péter Magyar wins, then there can be a new era in the Hungarian-EU relationship. So what do you think about that?
Okay, so let's start with Orban winning again. I think, I mean, it's ground zero where EU-Hungarian relations are, and I think this last veto about the 90 billion is just inexplicable and is very much against Article 4, which is about sincere cooperation. And so I also think that there might be an answer from the 26, because now it's 1 and 26. And I would expect, maybe I'm wrong, that Article 7 is going to be taken more seriously. And maybe the core countries who are determined will bring more reluctant countries on board, and I think it might cause the suspension of Hungary's voting rights. So I think we cannot exclude that possibility. And of course, it is impossible. But even if Magyar wins, I assume it is impossible to change the game structure, to have a new treaty. It is, we have the Treaty of Lisbon since 2009, and it is quite impossible to imagine getting all the member states on board to one treaty change. So this is why it is always, as quite usual in the case of the European Union, muddling through, finding the concrete solutions to a very particular problem. And I think this Article 7 opportunity is just there. So I think this would mean it would be an example of muddling through. Yeah.
You don't think Fico would veto?
I think Fico can be more open to compromise. I think he can be. Suspension. Yeah. Well. I mean. Well.
I think it's important that you bring it to the table, because I have the same impression, because if the European Union's everyday operations are in danger, and there is a danger of total that Hungary's vetoes will totally paralyze the European Union, maybe some reluctant member states, and especially the Eurozone countries, might have their double think about that. Is it still good to be on the same line as Hungary? And let me have a follow-up question on your point on the impossibility of reforms. There are some optimism on the side of some Western diplomats that if there will be a new enlargement round, then it can create an opportunity for a treaty change. Would you agree or would you disagree?
I think enlargement is a very particular issue, exactly because of Orban. I think Orban made the impression that the Western Balkan countries, with Vučić in the center, do we really want him around the table? So this is why actually the whole structure of the enlargement process was reformed back in, I think, 2020. And I think the European Union has been very undecisive, because geopolitically it would be very useful to have these countries on board to push back potential and very concrete Russian influence. So let's integrate them to our club. On the other hand, there is this danger of authoritarian and democracy backsliding, and non-democracies coming in the European Union. So I think it made the whole enlargement process paralyzed. These two ideas or two pros and cons. It is impossible to make a decision. And if Orban is gone, I don't think it stops to be a problem. So this experience will stay with us. So I think it will still keep the enlargement process very slow. And whether any enlargement process would contribute to a treaty change, well, I don't know if you remember, there was this report of the 12 back in 2024 or something. It was kind of a recommended program by 12 experts. It was a kind of a Franco-German initiative, and it actually recommended a treaty change, but a treaty change of concentric circles. So the idea is that, okay, we have a treaty change, but we might have a new treaty in the framework of a smaller club. And let's deepen European integration, but let's not include all the 27 member states. How big this club would be is unclear. But so there is going to be concentric circles, but not outside the European Union, but inside the European Union. So differentiated integration is very much on the agenda, but of course it has not been pushed forward since the idea was published. So, but it is kind of there.
Yeah, thank you. Concentric circles, yeah, have a central importance in our discussion this evening. Zsolt, Timothy's point was that when it comes to the global far right and also the European far right, maybe Hungary's role as, how to say, the glue or even some kind of leader of this international cooperation is a bit of exaggerated. According to some background information, Orban tends to think that if he fails, then the whole European far right and European far right cooperation is going to fail, and maybe the transatlantic cooperation between the patriotic forces is going to fail as well. So how much you think there's probably no one who did more research on that, what role Hungary plays in this international cooperation of so-called patriotic forces and also in the transatlantic alliance. So how much you think that Orban is really a central figure who, if he becomes an opposition figure and does not have the executive power anymore, can his influence remain, and or will he, if he is more pulled in the background than European far right parties and American far right can have the same electoral results than without him?
Well, I agree reluctantly with Timothy that the direct implications of the Hungarian election on the future of radical right-wing parties is overblown. Ultimately, what matters is whether the party has an offer that matches the demand in the local society, local context. In that regard, we will not see, I think, much direct impact. But I think, well, first we have to acknowledge that in the last decades, there has been a surge, a rise of radical, populist, authoritarian, illiberal parties. And the question is, was this only because of economic reasons, or there was something else behind it? Number one. Number two, is it just a kind of coincidence of many idiosyncratic stories, or there is something bigger behind it? And when we answer this question, then what we are speaking about is basically whether there is alternative to liberal democracy or not. And to some extent, Hungary was a proof of concept. Hungary showed that there exists a version of illiberal state that is palatable to Western European taste, that can function in the West, and thereby it worked as a reference point that is very important, because parties don't only need voters, they also need activists and intellectuals, and what they need is a vision, that something more than simply increasing our the number of seats with 2% can be achieved. So I think Hungary was important in this regard, and therefore the Hungarian election can have an impact on the narrative that surrounds political struggles. It can also have an impact on money. Orban channeled money to Spain, France, Portugal, Slovenia, many countries. It can also have an impact on the shape of the cooperation. You mentioned the patriots. Well, again, he is not the only figure there, but without him, I don't think we would have this particular composition of patriots in Europe. And that takes me a little bit back to Central Europe. So people like Babiš, I think, watched this election with great interest, because the fact that Babiš ended up in Patriots has something to do with this gravitational pull that was created around Orban and around this template that implied that, to some extent, maybe indeed the liberal era is over. There is room for even an opportunistic person like Babiš on the other side. This is feasible. So in this regard, I do expect some longer impact on how these parties do. Just the last point, it's really amazing how far the influence of Orban has reached money-wise, idea-wise. If you look at debates, for example, among conservative British Catholics and Anglicans, and you look at their fora in Oxford, in other places, how they discuss theological and social models, and then you check who sponsored the conference. It's Orban. And the same in US and many other places. So there is an infrastructure out there that exists today that hasn't existed back then. It exists partly because of Orban, and I think Orban can finance that infrastructure from opposition as well, because he put aside a huge amount of money. So I think some of this, the flow of money will still go. He cannot use the Hungarian state. That will be the big difference, because until now, people like Putin and others had a state. And for the proof of concept, that was also important, that in the entire state apparatus is there. That will not be there. But him, as someone who is deeply interested in molding this discourse and forms of cooperation, person with ideas and person with interest in how financial incentives can make a difference, I think he can be still an important actor.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I would follow up on that and turn to you, Timothy. So, Zsolt have discussed the model role of Viktor Orban on the among European forces and European far right and in the transatlantic dimension. And yes, he clearly become this influential and inspirational figure for many. Can Péter Magyar and TISZA, in case of a TISZA victory, become a similar hero for the pro-democratic forces in Europe? We rarely have such an attention on any elections in Central and Eastern Europe that Hungary receives now, but Péter Magyar probably can benefit from it and be a beneficiary of this huge attention. And if there is a governmental change, can it boost some kind of center-right or mainstream forces in Europe and beyond? So can he be an encouragement for Democrats?
Great question. Before I come to that, just a quick comment on what Zsolt said, which I thought was very interesting. I mean, first of all, by the way, there's a Roger Scruton Cafe in Budapest, We don't have one in London, so you know. And on the model, I mean, I absolutely take your point, but of course, you know, the Orban model, as it were, proof of concept, but when you look at it more closely, the model is parasitic, isn't it? I mean, it depends upon other people not behaving as you behave. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the EU funds on which the system depends. It's rather like the Brexiters who used to say, oh, of course, we'll still have the single market and we'll still be able to trade freely with all these countries. And so it depends on other people not doing as you do. Where I think the alternative model clearly is developmental authoritarianism. It's China. I mean, if you're looking for a real big, credible model, and what's so interesting about Orban to me is not so much the model he defends, he develops here in this very skillful way within the EU, it's how early he gets onto the idea that you've got to hitch your chariot to China. On your point, look, at the moment, the Hungarian story, if I can put it that way, and I think there are probably more journalists here for this weekend than there were in June 1989. I mean, it is extraordinary. It is extraordinary how much attention there is being given to this. It's entirely about Orban. It's about the fall of Orban. And most newspaper readers, media consumers around the world have very little idea who Peter Magyar is. So maybe there's some potential for do that. I could construe an argument in which you have a model of how you come out of populism, and you know it's reconciling core liberal values and commitment to the EU with, so to speak, national tradition and national pride and values associated with the right. But at the moment, we don't really see that. Certainly no one outside Hungary sees that. And so I think it's going to be, if there is a TISZA government, and particularly if it has a constitutional majority, I think it's then going to be a challenge for it to develop that positive narrative which has broader relevance beyond just saying Hungary is back.
Krista, Timothy have touched upon already on possible other troublemakers in Europe than Orban. And then there can be other politicians who paralyze EU decision-making. And he mentioned Jordan Bardella. So what do you think about that? Yeah, we are heading towards many elections in the next years in the European Union and in the biggest countries of the European Union, but also some smaller ones, radical right forces are leading the polls. So do you think that even if Orban is defeated, then this rise of the populist right forces can endanger the decision-making structure and the operability of the European Union, or you rather think that far-right leaders can adapt to the European Union, like, for example, Giorgia Meloni did?
Yeah. I think it would be a problem for the European Union if Bardella was a successful candidate in the French elections, and it is. I just looked at the fresh French opinion polls concerning the European Union, how much trust they have. It is one of the lowest in Europe. Those two factors together, being the Rassemblement National candidate plus this atmosphere in the society, if you just look at that problem, then you would start being concerned. However, if you put that in context, I think the picture is somewhat more different, because if you look at the opinions of the French about their own government, then the trust is even lower. So actually, trust is in the European Union is higher in France, even with that low percentage, than the trust in their own government and in their own parliament. So there is an internal political crisis, first and foremost, and then comes the European Union. And then, okay, probably right-wing French government would make the dynamics in the decision-making in the council and the gentleman's club, as you said, very different. However, if you look at these parties and the parties of the patriots, then I'm going to start a project. I'm going to go for some EU funding about that, because I'm always wondering, so what do these parties actually recommend? So what their program is? Because if you look at the Patriots Manifesto, it says it is, you know, Europe of nations. But what exactly is that? So Europe of nations, you would think it is going back to, you know, let's get rid of qualified majority voting. Let's limit the commission. Good. That's the institutional ideas. Okay. But how are you going to operate the Eurozone with an intergovernmental European Union? Apparently, no intergovernmental organization has a common currency. No intergovernmental organization has a common agricultural policy or cohesion policy or a redistribution of 1% of the GDP that compared to a state it is rather low, but compared to an international organization it's enormous. So actually after a while these parties should come up with a plan that actually tells the people, okay, what are the consequences of our idea of the Europe of nations? And actually, still Marine Le Pen started that. Once she tried, when Macron was elected in the 2017 elections, there was a point when Marine Le Pen came up with the idea, started to talk in public about France leaving the Eurozone. And then they did some opinion polls, and this was not a particularly popular idea. So she stepped back and said, okay, we are going to have double currencies. So at home we are going to have the franc back, and then the companies who are actually trading with European countries, they can use the euro. It was not particularly effective either. So she dropped this idea altogether during the campaign and still was not elected. So what I'm wondering about, even if Bardella comes in successfully, so what are these parties are going to do about very concrete EU policy areas that even now, with this double-faced, partly intergovernmental, partly supranational decision-making system that just provides us with the opportunity of muddling through and, you know, getting our ways through these crises. Even now, it is difficult. How are they going to make decisions with only intergovernmental methods with veto rights at each and every member state?
Timothy?
Yeah, I just wanted, that's extremely interesting what Christina said. Two quick comments. One is, you know, the sort of superficial way of talking about Bardella is, as you know, is he going to be Meloni or Orban?
Yeah,
I mean, that's a sort of cliche question, and so if you don't have Orban there, that rather helps. And at the moment, it's looking much more Meloni, and I think, in fact, and after all, you know, Peter Magyar in many ways is Meloni. So I think, you know, let's be clear about that, so that, you know, I think we're going to get a lot more Meloni, and which means, for example, that in your domestic politics, you have a very strong national or indeed nationalist rhetoric. You have a very hard line on immigration. Your cultural politics are extremely conservative, but ultimately you still sort of play by the rules and try and reach agreements in Brussels. But the other point, because you were talking very eloquently in the sort of intra-EU context, but of course the entire story of the EU has been under an American security umbrella, which is now dramatically in question. I mean, literally 3 days ago, the White House spokesperson said, the president wants to talk to the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, about the US leaving NATO. About the US leaving NATO, not just the Europeans doing more for their defense, the US leaving NATO. And as Trump is clearly becoming more erratic and more unpredictable, we have the challenge of how we as Europeans, all of us, are going to defend ourselves, coming down the road at the rate of that. And I think if we're looking for a factor which is going to bring us together and compel more integration, it's as likely to be the challenge of European defense as it is those issues you were talking about.
Yeah. But doesn't that mean that that we actually need more Europe? So that's another extra area where we need to work together. Actually, those opinion polls that I checked, more than 80% of the European people want a common security policies of some sort. So doesn't that mean that that the Europe of nations idea is well, not feasible or timely at the moment?
I completely agree. It's not feasible and timely, but of course I mean, Europe for the last however many decades has had these two cores, hasn't it? It's had the defense core in NATO and the political and economic core in the EU. We now need a European security core. And it's not simply going to be the EU. It's absolutely clear. It's going to involve the Europeanization of NATO. It's going to involve the EU as a primary motor of the Europeanization of defense procurement and the defense industry. And it's going to involve elements of coalitions of the willing. So it's going to be a different structure. But absolutely, this is going to be an area of more Europe, and which makes a simple nationalist agenda, Europe of the nations, less plausible. Yeah.
Sure, let me pull you into the discussion on this point as well. So what do you think? Would you agree that if Orban is defeated, then it can strengthen the role model of politicians like Giorgia Meloni? And generally, I think the typical tendency is that more radical political forces getting closer to power, typically getting more moderate on their position on the European Union. For example, I mean, Geert Wilders, like a bit more than 1 decade ago, wanted to leave the European Union. When he became closer to the government and were supporting the government, he did not repeat the same arguments. So in that sense, maybe Orban is more of an odd one out, having some impact in the broader region, maybe on Fico. He pulled over Babiš from ALDE to the Patriots, but the typical gravity of the center seems to rather still exist in the European Union. So if Orban is defeated, can it mean that he disappears as this anti-European role model, and can it make European cooperation stronger, and can it make Eurosceptic far-right parties more pro-European?
Well, I definitely agree that Orban is a very special character. Indeed, a typical opposition leader is, the role model is the one of rebel. A typical governmental politician follows the role model of a manager. he is unique in being able to do both for a long time simultaneously. So while Meloni became a manager, and this is what we hope for Bardella as well, Orban was a manager, but was, or I'm speaking in past tense, sorry, but also a rebel, and that made, I think that's explanation for both his success and his relative isolation, in the sense that indeed, as opposed to Meloni, he became very marginalized within the European Union. Now, if more the Meloni type character starts to dominate the hard right in Europe, I think that will be definitely, it will definitely make easier the conversation that takes place at the decision-making table when it comes to various European issues. It will come with a strange new challenge, though, because with Orban, I think by already a decade ago, it became relatively clear that he's on the other side of the field, that there is a kind of black and white difference between his character and EU's character. With Meloni, with Wilders, and probably with Bardella, you have this gray zone characters. And then the question whether that's good or bad depends on what do you think about, for example, the cordon sanitaire. Those who believe in cordon sanitaire, they think that even though these actors are ready to cooperate, they still have to be kept outside. They should not be allowed to make decisions. They should not be allowed in, in the debate, in the public space. I'm not so convinced that the cordon sanitaire is always such a great idea. I think we should, we have to accept reality, and we have to learn to live with people like them. But then that can have implications that we don't foresee now. So clearly there, the normative commitment to European Union is not there. These people will not care whether there is any member state that violates, let's say, human rights or rule of law, if that doesn't affect them directly or their economic interest. So that will be a very different European Union, where you will have this maybe pragmatic people who simply don't share our normative commitments, and that can lead to the disintegration of the European Union in a different way than if you let people like Orban reign.
Yeah, thank you, Timothy. I would like to raise one question about British politics, and you already mentioned in your keynote that it seems that Nigel Farage's electoral chances most probably will not be decided this Sunday in Hungary. But I would be curious about how do you see? I mean, what are the repercussions, if there are any, in the UK of the elections in Hungary, or how the Hungarian elections are seen from the UK? Orban has been for a while a kind of hero for the Eurosceptics in the UK, and what we can tell is that in the British press there is also a rather great interest towards what's happening in Hungary these days. But do you think that the results of the elections can have any impact on the public discourse in the UK, for example, when it comes to can other countries follow the UK role of Brexit, or can Euroscepticism spread in other European countries as well?
I'm afraid the short answer is no. I think it'll have very little impact. But if we have the most positive outcome, and you have a, so to speak, return to Europe by Hungary, and it turns out that in some plausible sense the Orban experiment failed, because Hungary is coming back, that will help and catalyze the discussion that is starting in Britain for the first time, which is a serious discussion about rejoining the European Union. Now, the main driver of that is not Viktor Orban, it's Donald Trump, because Britain put all its money on the American card, and look what happened to that. So now we're having this discussion. So I think if the longer-term result of this election is that we have a more credible, more dynamic European Union, then that will have a significant effect, longer-term indirect effect on Britain.
Especially if Donald Trump endorses strongly Nigel Farage?
Yeah, well, they already have. They've done that. They've done the thumbs up. Yeah, yeah.
And can you imagine that Nigel Farage is going to be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom?
Well, I can imagine all sorts of awful things, I can tell you. But if the question is, do I think it's probable, my answer is a cautious no. The Conservative Party, the British Conservative Party, is, subject to question by Jolt, I think probably the most successful political party in modern times. I mean, it has an extraordinary record of political success. It's still very unpopular after 14 years in power. It's led by Kemi Badenoch, who is a Nigerian British woman with dreadlocks. That's not a great appeal to your 75-year-old retired Colonel Blimp in Surrey. And people are just very unhappy with the way things have gone. So my hunch is that, given that we have probably 3 years at least till the next general election, that actually the Tories will come back. And what we will get is our own version of European politics, because we now have a five-party system, six-party system in Scotland and Wales, right? And therefore you're probably going to need a coalition, and it's either going to be Labour with Lib Dems and or Greens, or Conservatives with Reform UK, either as the junior partner in the coalition, or maybe tolerating a minority government or of that kind. And this, by the way, just very quickly goes to the cordon sanitaire part. I couldn't agree more with Jolt. I think it's very foolish just to have a total dogmatic attachment to the cordon sanitaire in all circumstances, whatever happens. If there's a party which is playing basically by the rules, saying things we dislike and getting 35 or 40% of the vote, it is wrong on grounds of democratic principle that they should simply be excluded forevermore from power. It's also foolish in practice, because then the Liberals will take all the blame for all the mistakes, which is what's happening to Macron, number one. And number two, you're not going to get what you had in the Netherlands, where Wilders, to a significant degree, lost out precisely because he was let into government. So I very much agree on that.
Thank you. Krista, coming back a bit to Hungary, what do you think, how much Péter Magyar TISZA is elected can count with the goodwill of the European Union? There are two lines of thought here mainly. One is that Viktor Orban have been so obstructionist within the European Union that European Council and the Commission will do its best to support a new Hungarian government in any means possible, including a lot of financial transfers and political support and so on. The other line of thought says that what happened to Poland, for example, that a lot of money were transferred and the goodwill was there towards the law and justice government, but finally, due to the lack of reforms because of the vetoes of the president, finally the Polish institutional reforms were not implemented, and it was money not very well spent. So, do you think that Hungary, that the TISZA government can count with this goodwill, or will it be a very rocky road for the next government?
Well, I think so. I think that if Péter Magyar is getting elected, I think it will be a huge relief for most of the European leaders. And this brings with it this open opportunities for cooperation, meaning, of course, negotiations about the reopening of EU funds, of Erasmus, and but of course there need to be concrete steps from the side of the government. Now Magyar is saying that the first step that he is going to take is to join the European Public Prosecutor's Office, which is very much, you know, approaching the core or going close to the core of the European Union. And of course, the rest we can't tell. So how we also have a president who has to sign all the laws that are passed in the parliament. The huge difference is that he is not directly elected, so he is not holding the direct legitimacy from the people, and I think it is a difference. So I would, of course, I can't see the future, but as you see the stories coming out in the last couple of weeks from very different actors or organizations like the police, like the military, I think there is this great drive or like internal tension within these organizations to do things right, and I think it will maybe take us to a different path than these Polish obstacles.
So take us to a different path means that you think that the institutions, even without a constitutional majority, that we tend to assume will remain loyal to Fidesz, finally will not remain loyal to Fidesz.
I think they will. Let's say there's this nice kind of EU word. They will shift their loyalties. I think. I think.
And we have some nice traditions on
Yes.
that in Hungary.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Zsolt, can I ask you on this point as well? So how much you think that we can make a parallel with Poland? I mean, let's assume that Fidesz that TISZA has an absolute majority, but no super majority, no constitutional majority. Do you think that Fidesz will be able, and Viktor Orbán, to paralyze the next government through the plethora of independent institutions right now filled with Fidesz loyalists, or this pragmatic approach that Kristina have been talking about might become more dominant and paves the way for a more efficient TISZA governance?
I'm afraid the answer lies not so much in kind of traditional study of institutions, but in political psychology. So how exactly the Sunday election will be experienced by the people, by the media, how it will be framed, whether it will be framed as a mandate to do radical changes, whether you know, the way how after the election results become public, how exactly Peter Magyar reacts, how exactly Orbán reacts, I think may give a clue to many of these institutional leaders. So I think there are some who are very ready to cooperate, or I mean, they have the kind of background that allows them to do so, including, I think, the president of the National Bank, who used to be a core Fidesz member, but I think he will probably cooperate. But when it comes to constitutional court, I am much less optimistic. And so in general, my answer is I don't know. What I would like to underline as a kind of negative observation or comment is that I think we have to get used to countries that shuttle between democracy and non-democracy. And while we and we had quite a lot of historical reason to think that once a society overcomes certain socioeconomic or cultural thresholds, from then on there is, well, the kind of evolutionary logic toward more and more democracy. This is not the case. More and more we see defeated authoritarians coming back. If you think about our region, if you think how Fico came back, Babiš came back, peace remained solid, and so on. So the idea that we have now this slogan again, now or never, and if now, then from then on, rosy future. It can happen that there will be success. The government will be able to implement meaningful reforms, and things will go, will look quite nice for a couple of years. And then in 5 years from now, we are back at square one. So,
thanks for the optimistic note.
So my point is that the problem is that all these individual performances, which are extremely important, like how Peter Magyar will be able to behave under this high pressure. Next to that, there is also a context, a global context, a regional context, and it can easily happen that there will be constraints on how much you can consolidate a liberal democratic regime if, like Timothy mentioned, the Chinese model as becoming a kind of competitive model. So under those circumstances, maybe we shouldn't expect miracles from a single individual.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you about your point on China, Timothy. So thanks Scholt for mentioning that. You said that according to this great paper that have just been published, Hungary is the bridgehead of China in Europe. But you also seem to suggest that China's global influence will definitely grow in the coming years. So which other member states of the EU might become alternative or additional bridgeheads of China in Europe, or will it become like that the whole European Union is becoming a bridgehead of Europe? As you also mentioned, the hawkish stance on China, especially after the broken ties, Euro-Atlantic ties, seem to change quite a lot. And previous hawks who talked about having bigger distance to China right now have a much more cooperative approach, emphasizing that European Union needs allies in this changing environment. So how can China, or in which ways, or through which countries, or through which institutions you think can have a growing influence in Europe?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I mean, by the way, I'm very much with Zsolt. I think the typical regime of our time worldwide is, neither a tyranny nor a democracy, but some hybrid regime, and that is in a sense the new normal around us, and that somehow feeds into our debates about our own political systems. Look, Peter, I think the situation is this. Put very starkly, Europe today is under attack militarily from Russia, economically from China, and politically from the United States. And that's an extraordinary triple challenge that we've never had before. And if your Germany and your business model was based on cheap security from America, cheap energy from Russia, and easy exports to China, crash, 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 the pillars of your business model. So now the temptation or the debate is clearly, as it were, is this a trilemma? We can't do all three. We can't fend off all three at the same time. And therefore, if we are going to build up our defense against an aggressive Russia with much less support from the United States, then we have to bite the bullet and have a closer relationship with China. The problem with that is not so much the nature of the Chinese political system, although in terms of our values that should be a problem, and is for many Europeans. The problem is that the Chinese are eating our lunch. There was a very good article on trade with China in the Financial Times the other day, which asks the question, what trade with China, right? Trade consists in my having made something that you want to buy and you making something, goods or services, that I want to buy. But at the moment we're in a position where China makes increasingly almost everything we want to buy, and China wants to buy less and less of what we make. And so just as an economic proposition, it's not overwhelmingly attractive in the longer term, shall we put it that way. In the short term, it's great because you get your BYD factory and your battery factory, and you get this, this immediate, as it were, shot, injection. So that I actually think, and ECFR, European Council on Foreign Relations, has done some good work on this. Janke Ertel did a very good paper on this. I actually think we do have to take on all three challenges at the same time and look to our own economic future as well as our defense and as well as seeing off the political challenge from the United States.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe there is a fourth challenge as well. I mean, the countries within the European Union that sometimes make EU decision making much more difficult, as it happens at the moment. So it just underlines how important internal consistency of the EU is becoming. And maybe this is a reason why Hungarian elections are particularly important for European Union. At this point, I would like to bring in the audience that was very disciplined so far in listening to us. So we would make a round of questions. Please introduce yourself, raise a question, and mention who your question addresses among the speakers. So the first one, please.
Hello, thank you for this talk. My name is Francis Farrell. I'm a reporter from the Kiev Independent. I came from Kiev by train yesterday. Usually report on the front line, but I'm also half Hungarian, so it's very good to be here. We didn't talk too much about Ukraine, actually, and I'm just so curious what you think, whoever wants to answer the question, about how a country moves on from the demonizing of Ukraine, fighting, right next to Hungary for its very existence, from one side of politics, who's very clearly working with the aggressor, and from the other side of being very careful not to touch the issue almost at all. How does a country's sentiments move on beyond that, and what does that mean for a policy of government which is less corrupt and authoritarian in the future, we all hope, but still populist in a way. And on top of that, when we talk about the model for far-right countries in Europe, we've made a lot of comparisons, how they feel about democracy, how they feel about Europe, but what does that mean for how far-right countries, far-right parties in different European countries, how they look at Ukraine, having seen what's gone on in Hungary? Because from Ukraine we're getting very scared every time there's an election in Europe. We think every single new far-right winner will be another Orbán or Fico. What do you think? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I would stop here for a while, and thanks a lot for raising this question. Who would like to address?
Very briefly, so Hungarians are exposed for 10 years by now to anti-Ukrainian propaganda. So this is something that no other society, I think, experienced, and this had an effect. Luckily, there is no very deep historical root behind it. So it's, as opposed to our relationship with Romanians and Serbs and Slovaks and so on, the Ukrainian one is not a central one. So I think it will be possible to redo the damage that has been done. And in that regard, it matters quite a lot, actually, how Ukrainians will appear in the media in the coming months and years. Because until now, they were really demonized, and very special portrait of them was presented to us. So I think now there is room for Ukrainians to present themselves, and in that regard, it depends not only on us, but also on them.
Well, I mean, I defer to Zsolt on that, but just to say that up till now, this has been an issue that has clearly divided far-right parties, most dramatically between Poland and Hungary, right? Unfortunately, even in Poland, this is beginning to change. And the strong consensual pro-Ukrainian line is breaking down, and the two most dynamic far-right parties, Konfederacja and Korona, are having a more or less anti-Ukrainian line. But I don't think it's ever going to be an issue where there's a common position of the far-right parties across Europe, because it depends on your national history.
Just following up on that, in the European Parliament, the Patriots for Europe is the group of far-right parties that is traditionally bit more pro-Russian, while the European conservatives and reformists with Giorgia Meloni, with the Poles and so on, it is way more pro-Ukrainian. But we have also done some research, and my colleague Bulcsú Hunyadi have also written extensively about that even within the patriotic group, Fidesz is an outlier in terms of its pro-Russian stance, in its open, uninhibited pro-Russian stance, which in most of the other parties within that group seems to be even a bit too much, and in their rhetoric they are definitely more subtle. And just following up on what Zsolt said, I think if Fidesz is defeated this Sunday, it's a big if, but if it happens, then it will be a decision of the voters against, more than a decade of pro-Russian and anti-Ukrainian propaganda, which is in the center of the campaign at the moment. If the voters reject Fidesz, then they reject, to a certain extent, this propaganda as well, which I would not suggest that it did not have and made any damage so far. It definitely did, but I would agree that it can be undone. And even if this, I think, is more cautious when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, I think sitting in the European People's Party, desperately needing the EU money, I think TISZA has to be, to a certain extent, and a new Magyar government online, and especially in this crucial issue as well. So there are some external constraints as well. Okay, next question.
Mateusz Mazzini, Gazeta Wyborcza, Warsaw. And I do confirm the cliche, every other European reporter is in Budapest for the weekend, as you can see with the questions. You guys talked extensively about the impact of Viktor Orban staying or not staying in power for other countries. But I want for a moment to flip that equation and ask about the impact of other countries on Orban should he stay in power, namely the United States. So let's assume for a second that Orban remains prime minister after the Sunday election. Whether he wins or not, one doesn't necessarily have to mean the other. But at the same time, things are going disastrously bad for the Republican Party in domestic politics in the US. As of this morning, prediction markets, which may or may not be reliable, but it's an indicator of something, have it that the Democratic Party might win both houses of Congress. And Trump is becoming detrimental to Europe, left, right, and center, and you see it pretty much everywhere that, you, Tim, talked about that yourself. Trumpian supporters in Europe are sort of trying to distance themselves, some more, some less, but it's a very toxic label. Would you then imagine a situation in which Orban remains in charge in Hungary, but the Orban coalition, the Patriots or the allies, falls apart because Orban is too attached to Trump and everyone else cannot afford to be attached to a president of the United States that threatens to pull out of NATO, who is anti-European, who threatens the economic security, the military security, and pretty much every other dimension of European politics?
Thank you. Let me, Yeah, let us collect a few more questions. Gentleman there.
I'm Christopher Walsh from Corvinus University, where I teach. I would like to ask you, in case the election victory is very narrow in favor of TISZA, and this is contested by Fidesz, and going on for a while, what kind of scenarios could you imagine, kind of murky tricks of Fidesz that they clinch to power? Could the old parliament reconvene, elect Orban to president, furnish this to more power, or what kind of options are there for Fidesz not to accept a narrow election victory? Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe a third one. Yes. For you, Violetta.
Hello. My name is Violetta Vaida, and just not to have all journalists, I'm the voice of civil society. I'm currently with an international organization of Roma youth organizations called Pirana Menza. And at the same time, I'm a Romanian citizen, and I would really like to hear you speak about the power of popular movements to stand up to the far right, because we've seen that in Romania, very surprisingly. We've seen it in Moldova, and I'm wondering if there is a TISZA win, we can see that it is actually to do with everyday democracy, where people in the countryside have said, we don't want this kind of government anymore, we actually want a different kind of government. Is it possible that the center of power of Central Europe goes a bit east, and these countries become a beacon of popular uprising that is fairly successful in standing up to the far right? I mean, in Romania, there was a really great discussion after the last elections that finally we've managed to do our revolution that started in 1989. And is this a moment when those revolutions actually can be successful?
Thank you. Let's start with this question. Maybe Timothy, do you like to answer that? Okay, or the first.
I leave, because both the other ones went away about Hungary specifically. Mateusz, so if I understood you correctly, your question was, if Trump becomes totally poisonous, does the Orban coalition fall apart? Yes, roughly speaking. Quite possibly, but I personally would think that Viktor Orban is cynical and agile enough to distance himself from Trump at that point and find another line. I mean, he's good at that. I think the more interesting question is, as George rightly said, all populisms have an economic and a cultural component. And it's a mixture of the economic and cultural. Now, what Orban represents to so many other hard right nationalist populists, including a lot of the Trumpians, is the culture wars side of that. It's a civilizational agenda. And the question at that point is whether, and that's what Vance is majoring on, and the question is whether that agenda remains in any way relevant, or actually, as seems to me quite plausible, finally goes to the back burner because the everyday bread and butter economic issues are just so pressing for all the reasons we know, that in the end it becomes much more, it's the economy stupid. And if it becomes it's the economy stupid, then a lot of these parties do lose one of their key cards.
I would take the third question. Vera, is that Violetta? About the potential popular uprising after a potential TISZA victory. Whereas, of course, we cannot exclude that, and we saw examples in the countries you mentioned in your question. Hungary has, I think, different traditions, and what we were writing about extensively in the last 30 years in political science is how mostly atomized this country is, and how The system change that Timothy talked about was not followed by crowds being outside on the streets. So I have there is a film. Probably most Hungarians saw it. The title is Moszkvatér, and it is about a secondary school class who are finishing their studies. They are 18, and it is 1989. And there is this grandmother who is raising one of the kids, and the kid wants to go out somewhere. But the grandmother usually cooks, and she says that I have not prepared lunch. Please go and eat something somewhere. Here's some money, because she's watching the reburial of Imre Nagy on Hero Square, and I think this is a very powerful scene that a citizen who finds it obviously very important. She recognizes the importance of that situation, and it will have direct effect on her life, but she's watching that on television. So I think this is a very powerful sign or symbol of how much Hungarians are willing to go out on the streets and demonstrate and perform actually politics.
Well, unfortunately, this is the question that maybe somebody in the audience actually knows more, because indeed there are many speculations, and some speculations involve the president, others the budget council, the constitutional court, and so on. But I am not an expert on that, and I don't think that we will see a kind of coup in the coming weeks. What may happen is that very important decisions will be made in the months or 6 weeks or so, while the outgoing government can still make decisions, and those rules and decisions will constrain very much the room of maneuver of the next government. But I don't think they can just flip the election results over. If I may, just a little bit about the other things very shortly. One is that Trump helped a lot Orban symbolically, but not materially. There was no money coming from America in any way. Much more could have been done if anybody wanted to do. And so in that sense, Orban owes nothing to the Republican Party. And also the big Gazeta Wyborcza, it hasn't been mentioned, but I think in our context very important that Peter Magyar said his first travel will be to Warsaw. And I mean, this is in a kind of, it's a national common denominator, I think, for all of us. We want to see that happen. And yeah, that brings liberals, left-wingers, conservatives, everybody together. As far as democracy, I think it's interesting that Peter Magyar was not the most pro-democratic politician we had in the last decades. We have seen many of those who wanted to fight for democracy, and we wanted none of them. We finally opted for someone who focused on bread and butter issues, focused on corruption, focused on all kinds of other issues. Interestingly, somehow, during his campaign, the democratic element kind of penetrated and shaped the whole campaign. So by now, I think he does have a mandate to make Hungary more democratic, but he was not somebody who raised this issue at the high level of abstraction, who fought for constitutional change and so on. So practically, it can result in some kind of very big shift towards democracy. But interestingly, it seems that in this case, the way to get there is not to put democracy on your flag, but put something else rather.
Let's go for a last round of questions. Yes, please, Gregor.
Yes, Yes, good afternoon. I'm Gregor Meyer. I'm a journalist who is based in Budapest. Did not travel now here specifically. Perhaps my question could go to Peter Greco because we have very short time until the election day, and there is activities about disinformation. There are messages going out which are completely undermining the things. Even the Prime Minister today was something saying about more or less potential coup by the Magyar people, not accepting a defeat. So do you see, do we have to calculate with some surprise like Romanians did in this first round of presidential elections where something happened where somebody just came out of the extreme right wing and came in a leading position?
Thank you. Peter has a question as well. And yes.
Thank you. I am Peter Molnar, a traumatized founder of Fidesz. And deeply traumatized, I should say. And my question is that related to that, it seems to me that a powerful claim for representing Hungarian identity, Hungary, national tradition is part of the Sunday chance, if I put it that way. And I wonder what you think, Timothy, and also Zsolt and Peter and others, that how can we reconceptualize what conservatism mean and drawing a line between conservatism and traditionalism, perhaps adding adjectives like national, because I'm so disturbed that it seems to me that without much thinking, conservative is still added to descriptions of what the party that I don't call Fidesz has been doing. It's regularly called conservative. I think it's conservative in a very backward sense, but not in any valuable sense. So what do you think about that? Also for the script.
Great question, thank you. And final question over there.
Thanks a lot. I will speak as a demonized Ukrainian, I guess, and I also work in the Democracy Institute. That's partly a personal note. So although I really wanted to see an autocrat being ousted as a result of democratic election, right? Not because of, I don't know, popular uprising or people being killed or anything of that kind. What bothers me is that it happens via the candidate who's framing a campaign basically as this autocrat light, right? That's nationalist, that's still being very conservative or whatever, what was already mentioned. And I realized at some point that I'm kind of Ukrainian left-wing activist, if I may, and I was staying on one of the Petr Mother's rally, and I was listening to a guy campaigning, nationalist campaign, and I thought, what a funny road for me to take, because that's my best bet that I'm staying on this rally, but what a twist, right? Question. Imagine he gets majority or supermajority on Sunday, and people around the globe have very little idea of who the guy is. And you have to write a cover story about what happened here. How do you tell this story so that it's inspiring, meaning a guy won through elections, campaigning, and he was successful to, get this victory in a highly repressive and very fine-tuned system. At the same time, how do you tell this conservative part of his campaign? If, for instance, right, I leave it at that. What would be your cover story for Petr Mother? Thanks.
Thank you. Zsolt, would you like to come first on the question of conservatism and on Péter Magyar's story?
Well, Peter Magyar is not an ideologue, and he comes from a background and brought many gestures with him that indeed remind us of Fidesz 10, 15 years ago. I can imagine that some of these gestures will be visible in his politics as well as a prime minister, and that also means that there could be some symbolic tensions between him and the People's Party, in spite of the fact that he needs EU support. So I'm a little bit concerned about these things, but I think he actually is at the moment, to me, a likely candidate of someone who could represent the nicer side of conservatism. And let me give an example. Why do I think so? Indeed, Fidesz was called conservative for various reasons that don't need to be discussed. But Fidesz was not typical conservative, for example, because of its extreme concern for centralization, which is not a conservative, tradition. Now, one of the things that Peter Magyar said is that the way he wants to distribute money is to, I don't know, identify 10 towns, villages in a neighborhood, give them the money, and let them decide what they spend on. So this idea is so contrary to the Fidesz type conservatism that maybe I don't know again whether out of pressure or out of internal convictions, but maybe we will see coming out of his policies something that we can call decent conservatism.
Just very briefly about the 2010 elections. Enyedi Zsolt and Kenneth Benoit wrote an article that I think was very frequently cited. I don't know how many citations you received to that article. And the title was Critical Elections. And maybe you are starting to write another one. But one of the factors for being called critical elections, as far as I remember, was the complete change of the party system that we had before, and the reason why I think you should start writing this article again or another one is where are left-wing parties from the Hungarian political system and why exactly they disappeared, and it is not a Hungarian phenomenon. So I think for personal reasons we can be sad and we can miss these parties. But I think first of all we need to understand the reasons. So I think there's a lot of work to do for political scientists in this respect.
A great academic conclusion that more articles need to be written. Listen, I don't think Fidesz is conservative at all. I mean, conservatism is a great tradition. But here's the thing: the great novelty in certainly the West European party landscape after 1945 was Christian democracy. This was something new, a distinctive kind of centre-right party. And this is what we are seeing disappearing, even within the EPP. I mean, I actually don't think you'll have all that many problems in the EPP, because even these Christian Democrat or former Christian Democrat parties are moving so far to the right, very hard line on immigration, for example. So he'll actually fit quite well there, so that the question really becomes, what is a centre-right party now? And I don't think anyone, to be quite frank with you, is looking to Peter Magyar as some sort of ideological model of a new conservative. Sorry, maybe in 10 years' time. Just to Peter's question, just to finish up on this, because Yeah, it's really interesting what we were just saying, which is what is going to be the story about the new Hungary, if it is a new Hungary after this election. Now, part of it is going to be about Peter Magyar's politics and what TISZA does and so on. I think that's going to be the lesser part of it, but another part of it is going to be, so what's the story about Hungary now? What's the kind of meta-narrative about Hungary? Because, you know, there's always a meta-narrative that unites all the different newspaper stories and media stories and longer essays that are written about a country. And Hungary is very interesting in this respect because it was overwhelmingly negative in mid-20th century. Then 56 completely flips the perception of Hungary, and you get a very positive narrative about Hungary, which goes all the way through 56, actually for the most part through Kadarism. To be honest, the merriest barrack in the block, etc., reform, reform, reform. 89, avant-garde, very positive. Orban, fantastic in the 1990s, all the way through to 2010. And then you get it turning again into this very negative narrative, with Hungary as a leader of anti-liberal nationalist populism and so on. And so, you know, is it going to be a question of turn again the narrative about Hungary, and what is this new narrative going to be? Now, I think in order to turn that narrative about Hungary, it really does have to be system change. It has to be a really clearly visible major change of system, because otherwise it will become just another messy European country, along with all the rest of us.
Thank you. And a short response to Gregor's question. I might be too optimistic about that, but I rather see this kind of narrative emerging that Brussels and Ukraine interferes into the election and threatening the integrity of the elections from outside, that is spread by the Hungarian pro-governmental media, by the politicians, and were just the same sentences were repeated by G.D. Vance a few days ago here in Budapest. So I rather see it as a kind of narrative aims at providing a comfortable explanation in case of an electoral loss, instead of a narrative aimed at justifying annulment of the results, I mean, as in the Romanian scenario. But what we can tell, based on our polls, is that there is a demand for this narrative, and there's an acceptance of this narrative on the Fidesz side of the political spectrum. So Fidesz voters tend to assume, majority of them, first of all, that TISZA is going to rig the elections. And second, the narrative that is not so popular in the overall public, that Ukraine and Brussels interfere into the elections, it definitely has a majority support in the Fidesz camp. So if Orban wants to play only to his camp and just fuel them with a narrative like 2020 United States, hopefully with less violent outcomes, then it can be, I think, a comfortable narrative. Of course, it can be used for more, but I'm typically not into brainstorming on horror scenarios. And a final point on Peter's important question. If you take a look at the ideologues around Fidesz, like Békés Márton, who is the chief editor of Kommentár, which has been one of the most important journals publishing conservative thought. If you take a look at just their Facebook sites, I think two articles that jump into your face quite quickly. One of them is an article on José Antonio Primo de Rivera, the founder of Falangism, who is depicted as a martyr of a good cause. And the second one is an article about how conservatism is dead, because conservatism is soft and it's just stops at the most important moment. So coming back to what Zsolt have previously said, I mean, Orban and the whole ideology of Fidesz is increasingly revolutionary instead of conservative, and I think they are increasingly explicit about that. Even if he is not one of the most influential ideologues around Orban, I think he is among the very few who remain. So without further ado, thanks a lot for our speakers. Thank you, Timothy. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Zsolt. Thank you for all of you for staying with us and for the great questions. And yeah, as a reward, there is some finger food and wine out there. Thank you.
But maybe just other people here. But I can send you an email.